The sun was sinking behind the distant buttes, painting the sky in bruised purples and gold, when Samuel Hartley heard the frantic pounding at his door. He'd been mending a broken fence post, hands rough and splintered, mind drifting as it often did to the years before the war, before the loneliness settled in like dust. The knock was desperate, not the kind of neighborly tap he'd grown used to in these empty miles. It was the sound of someone running from something, or someone. He set down his hammer, wiped his brow, and opened the door. There, slumped against the frame, was a woman. Her dress was torn, streaked with blood and mud, her hair tangled and wild. She looked up at him with eyes wide and haunted, lips trembling. "Please, don't let me die here," she whispered, voice barely more than a breath. Samuel's heart thudded in his chest. He'd seen wounds before, on men, on animals, but this was different. This was a person clinging to the last thread of hope. He knelt beside her, careful not to startle her, and saw the gash on her side, the bruises blooming along her arms. "You're safe now," he said, though he wasn't sure it was true. "Let's get you inside." He lifted her gently, surprised by how light she was, and carried her into the cabin. The fire was low, casting long shadows across the floor. He laid her on the cot, fetched a basin of water, and began cleaning her wounds. She winced but didn't cry out. Her jaw set with a stubbornness he recognized. He'd seen it in soldiers, in himself, in anyone who'd survived more than their share. "What's your name?" he asked, voice soft. She hesitated, eyes darting to the window as if expecting someone to burst through. "Mara," she said finally. "Mara Evans," he nodded, memorizing the name. "I'm Samuel. You're safe here, Mara. No one's going to hurt you." She closed her eyes, a single tear tracing down her cheek. He worked in silence, cleaning the blood, wrapping her side with strips of linen. The wound was deep but not fatal, if infection didn't set in. He'd seen worse, but not often on women. He wondered what kind of hell she'd run from. As night fell, Samuel kept watch by the window, shotgun across his knees. The wind rattled the shutters, and every creak set his nerves on edge. Mara slept fitfully, murmuring in her dreams, sometimes flinching as if struck. He wanted to ask her what had happened, who had done this. But he knew better than to press. Some wounds needed time before they could be spoken. In the gray light of dawn, Mara woke with a gasp, clutching her side. Samuel was there in an instant, offering her water. She drank greedily, then looked at him with a mixture of fear and gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered. He nodded, unsure what to say. He'd lived alone for so long, words felt foreign in his mouth. "You're safe," he repeated, hoping it was true. She tried to sit up, grimacing at the pain. "They'll come for me," she said, voice shaking. "They always do." Samuel's jaw tightened. "Who?" She hesitated, then spoke in a rush. "Men from the Black Creek gang. I saw something I shouldn't have. They killed a man. A marshal. I ran. They chased me for miles. I thought I'd lost them, but..." Her voice broke, and she looked away. Samuel felt a cold anger settle in his gut. He'd heard of Black Creek, a name whispered in saloons and around campfires, men who took what they wanted and left nothing but fear behind. He looked at Mara, saw the terror in her eyes, and made a silent promise. No one would hurt her here. He stoked the fire, brewed coffee, and tried to offer comfort in the only way he knew. By being present. By keeping watch. As the sun climbed higher, Mara drifted in and out of sleep, her breathing steadier, her color returning. Samuel sat by the window, eyes scanning the horizon, waiting for trouble. Mara's sleep was restless, haunted by memories Samuel could only guess at. He watched over her, the old shotgun never far from reach, every sense sharpened by the knowledge that danger might be drawing closer with every passing hour. The morning sun crept through the cracks in the shutters, painting thin lines of gold across the floorboards. Samuel moved quietly, boiling water for tea, slicing bread, doing what he could to make the cabin feel less like a place of hiding and more like a home. When Mara finally stirred, she blinked at the unfamiliar ceiling, confusion flickering across her face before she remembered where she was. She tried to sit up, wincing as the pain in her side reminded her of the night before. Samuel was at her side in an instant, steady and calm. "Easy," he said, offering her a cup of tea. "You need to rest. You lost a lot of blood." She took the cup with trembling hands, her eyes never quite meeting his. "Thank you," she murmured, her voice rough from thirst and fear. Samuel nodded, settling into the chair beside her. He didn't ask questions, not yet. He knew the look in her eyes, the look of someone who'd seen too much, who was still running even when her body had given out. He'd seen it in the mirror, years ago, after the war had left him with scars no one could see. They sat in silence for a while, the only sounds the crackle of the fire and the distant call of a hawk. Mara sipped her tea, her breathing slow and measured. Samuel busied himself with small tasks, mending a torn shirt, checking the bandage on her side, always keeping one ear tuned to the world outside. It was late morning when Mara finally spoke. "They'll come for me," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The Black Creek gang. I saw them kill a marshal. They can't let me live." Samuel's jaw clenched. He'd heard stories about Black Creek, men who rode into towns like a storm, leaving nothing but fear and broken lives behind. He looked at Mara, saw the desperation in her eyes, and felt something shift inside him. He'd spent years keeping to himself, avoiding trouble, but he couldn't turn his back on her. "You're safe here," he said, his voice steady. "I won't let anyone hurt you." Mara looked at him, searching his face for any sign of doubt. Whatever she saw there seemed to reassure her, if only a little. She nodded, pulling the blanket tighter around her shoulders. The day passed slowly. Samuel kept busy, chopping wood, tending to the animals, always glancing back at the cabin to make sure Mara was all right. He checked her wound, relieved to see it was clean and beginning to heal. She was tough, he realized, tougher than most men he'd known. As the sun dipped low, painting the sky in shades of fire, Samuel heard the distant thunder of hooves. He froze, every muscle tensed. Mara heard it too, her eyes wide, breath coming fast. "Get under the bed," Samuel said quietly. "Don't come out until I say." She didn't argue. She slid off the cot, biting back a cry of pain, and crawled beneath the bed. Samuel grabbed his shotgun, checked the shells, and moved to the window. He saw 3 riders cresting the hill, their silhouettes sharp against the dying light. They moved with purpose, scanning the land, looking for something, or someone. Samuel's heart pounded, but his hands were steady. He'd faced worse odds before. He waited, breath held, as the riders drew closer. They stopped at the edge of the yard, dismounted, and approached the cabin. The leader, a tall man with a scar running down his cheek, called out, "Evenin', friend. We're looking for a woman. Hurt, might have come this way. You seen anyone?" Samuel stepped onto the porch, shotgun resting in the crook of his arm. "Ain't seen anyone but coyotes and crows," he replied. Voice calm. The man's eyes narrowed. "Mind if we take a look around?" Samuel shook his head. "I mind plenty. This is my land. You got no business here." A tense silence hung in the air. The men exchanged glances, hands drifting toward their guns. Samuel didn't flinch. He met the leader's gaze, unblinking. Finally, the man spat in the dirt. "We'll be back," he said, turning on his heel. The riders mounted up and disappeared into the dusk. Samuel waited until the sound of hooves faded before he let out a breath. He went back inside, knelt by the bed, and gently called Mara's name. Mara crawled out from under the bed, her face pale but determined. Samuel helped her up, his hands gentle but firm. She sat on the edge of the cot, clutching the blanket around her shoulders, her eyes fixed on the door as if expecting it to burst open at any moment. Samuel poured her another cup of tea, his own nerves still humming from the encounter. He sat beside her, the silence between them heavy with unspoken fears. "They'll come back," Mara said quietly, her voice steadier than before. "They don't give up." Samuel nodded. "I know, but I've got a few tricks left, and you're not alone anymore." For the next 2 days, they prepared. Samuel reinforced the doors and windows, set traps along the trails leading to the cabin, and kept his shotgun loaded and within reach. Mara, though still weak, insisted on helping. She gathered firewood, fetched water, and even managed to clean and reload Samuel's old revolver with hands that shook only a little. The work gave her purpose, and Samuel saw a spark return to her eyes, a stubborn will to survive. On the third night, the air was thick with tension. The moon hung low, casting long shadows across the yard. Samuel sat by the window, watching, waiting. Mara dozed fitfully on the cot, the revolver within arm's reach. The silence was broken only by the distant howl of a coyote and the crackle of the fire. Then, just past midnight, Samuel heard it, the soft crunch of boots on gravel, the low murmur of voices. He nudged Mara awake, and she sat up instantly, alert and ready. Samuel motioned for her to stay low. He moved to the door, heart pounding, every sense alive. The first shot shattered the night, splintering the door frame. Samuel fired back, the blast echoing through the hills. Shadows darted outside, men shouting, guns flashing in the moonlight. Mara crawled to the far side of the room, pressing herself against the wall. But she didn't cower. She watched Samuel, her eyes fierce. The fight was brutal and short. Samuel's traps slowed the attackers, and his aim was true. 2 men fell in the yard, their guns clattering to the ground. The third, the scarred leader, burst through the door, wild-eyed and desperate. He raised his pistol, but Mara was faster. She fired the revolver, the shot ringing out sharp and final. The man staggered, dropped his weapon, and fell to his knees. Samuel crossed the room in 2 strides, kicking the gun away. The leader looked up at Mara, hatred and fear warring in his eyes. "You should have run farther," he spat, blood bubbling at his lips. Mara stared back, her voice cold and clear. "I'm done running." The man slumped to the floor, his breath rattling, and then he was still. The cabin was silent again, save for the ragged breathing of its 2 occupants. Samuel lowered his shotgun, his hands shaking now that the danger had passed. Mara set the revolver down, her shoulders sagging with exhaustion and relief. They buried the bodies at dawn, far from the cabin, marking the graves with simple stones. Samuel said a few words, not for the men they'd killed, but for the peace he hoped would finally settle over his land. Mara stood beside him, her face solemn, her eyes dry. In the days that followed, the world seemed to shift. Mara's wound healed, the color returning to her cheeks. She moved with more confidence, her laughter, soft and rare at first, slowly becoming a part of the cabin's daily rhythm. Samuel found himself smiling more, the weight of his own loneliness lifting as Mara's presence filled the empty spaces in his life. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Mara sat on the porch, watching the sky turn to gold. Samuel joined her, 2 mugs of coffee in hand. They sat in comfortable silence, the kind that only comes after surviving something together. "Thank you," Mara said at last, her voice gentle, "for not letting me die here, for giving me a chance." Samuel looked at her, his eyes warm. "You saved yourself, Mara. I just opened the door." She smiled, a real smile, and for the first time in a long while, Samuel felt hope. The past would always be there, but it no longer defined them. Together, they'd faced the darkness and found something worth holding on to. And as the stars blinked to life above the quiet hills, Samuel reached for Mara's hand. She took it, her grip strong and sure, and together they watched the night settle over the land, knowing that whatever came next, they would face it side by side.